Hillary Clinton breaks out the war plans and calls 4 of her possible presidential challengers scared of letting Americans have their say in the voting booth. Hey, it's about time we got some fighting words here. Crime rates are sharply up in several major American cities, and the Ferguson effect is getting the blame. Some believe it's more about the general public growing bolder and taking on the cops. And if you have ever thought about taking on the President of the United States nose to nose on video and lost your nerve, how could you let a 12-year-old have more guts than you? Telling it like it is bemoans the loss of a great friend thanks to corporate greed. Think 6-foot teddy bears and the piano scene from Big. It's all big, bold, and bearishly excellent. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Friday, June 5th, 2015.
Today, I'm reporting to you a significant deterioration of the security situation in Ukraine. Civilians continue to bear an unacceptable price. They are killed and wounded as both sides continue to place military positions in and around civilian infrastructure. Their property and livelihoods have been destroyed.
The scope of the reported cyber intrusion is something that continues to be under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are experts in this field, and they are working actively to understand exactly the scope of this particular intrusion, but also to determine who is responsible.
World Vision is here at the G7 Summit to send a message to G7 leaders. They have an opportunity this year in 2015 to make a major difference for children in the world. In the past, the G7 has made important decisions and provided funding to end preventable deaths of children.
These kids are American, just like us, and they belong here, and we want to do right by them. And so often in this immigration debate, it's an abstraction. And we don't really think about the human consequences of our positions.
America, land of the free, home of the brave. No greater melting pot anywhere in the world, where immigrants come from every corner of the globe to be part of the great experiment. So why then is it every time the phrase path to citizenship comes up in political conversation, there are certain blood vessels bulging and accompanying heads exploding? Isn't that what we're supposed to be all about? So let's get to it, left and right. He's the Democratic strategist and former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, David Goodfriend, joined by Republican strategist and Georgetown University professor Bradley Blakeman. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to get right to work here with the latest Pew poll, which is interesting. What do most Americans think about living illegally in the country? They say the people should be able to stay in the U.S. if they meet certain conditions. 72% say so. So I'll tell you what, Bradley, let's get to this now. When we look at this, this is 3/4 of America believe, yes, they should be allowed to stay. But aren't the key words here, if they meet certain requirements?
That's the $64 million question, is what are the requirements? You can ask every political candidate out there running for president, and you'll come up with every different answer. But here's the common denominator. There is no question that America was complicit in illegal aliens coming to America. Why? Because there was opportunity, there was jobs. They wouldn't come if they weren't porous borders to come across and there wasn't a need. So having said that, Republicans have to have a platform to fix immigration, which includes a broad spectrum of fixing the border, taxes, visas, and status. But it has to be individual bills instead of a huge omnibus bill, which killed us with health care reform.
David, isn't that fair to say? Because too many people will say, wait a minute, you've opened it up too far. There's all these people who have been waiting here decades, and even they can't get in. Don't we need these certain conditions in order to make it fair and right?
Well, you'll be shocked to learn that I view those poll results a little differently than my friend Brad Blakeman does. I see Republicans answering that poll very much the way Democrats do. They all seem to believe that there should be a so-called pathway to citizenship. And what I see is a division between what mainstream American Republicans around the country think and what the inside the Beltway political Republican class thinks, because it's that political class that's afraid of having more Latino citizens who just might vote Democratic and upset the apple cart. And I think it's a very short-sighted view, because if you remember, George W. Bush got 40% of the Latino vote when he first ran. The Latino population could very easily swing to the Republican column if Republicans would stop railing against immigrants like there's some sort of, disease. I think what Republicans should do is embrace immigration reform and show the Latinos who will become U.S. citizens that the Republican Party can be a home for them too.
Bradley, that's what we hear from a lot of people on the left. They say the Republican lawmakers are just scared. You've heard that word before.
Nonsense. And you know why? Because the president, when he was running for president back in 2007 and 8, promised in his first year there would be immigration reform. He failed on immigration reform. When he had all branches of government within the Democratic control, he did nothing. He's done nothing throughout his entire term. He will leave doing nothing. So all of a sudden this becomes a Republican problem? Quite the contrary. Republicans can point to a failed president and a failed Democratic leadership in the House and the Senate when they had power to do something on immigration across the board. Republicans do need a strategy, no question about it, but it's not going to be an omnibus, one size fits all. I believe that there should be 6 or 7 bills on immigration. One is independent of the other, and we need to solve the problem. The question is, and we'll go back to Ed, your original question, and that is, what are the conditions? Are they fair? Are they equitable? And do they make sense?
We still have to hear a lot of these conditions. All right, now with the word scared in here, and let's move on here, David, to Hillary Clinton, who has accused 4 potential candidates, her rivals, of being scared of letting citizens have their say, calling for every American to automatically be registered to vote. You got to admit that it's good to see some fighting words getting in here from Hillary Clinton, because it seems like pulling out that scared tactic, just like you and so many others have done, it works.
It does work, but here's the interesting thing. There's a definite connection between what we just discussed in immigration and what we are discussing now in voting rights, and it's this. Nobody should be afraid of democracy. Nobody should be afraid of having an over-inclusive voting bloc. What we should be afraid of is the restriction of voting rights over made-up excuses like fraud, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of 1% of overall voting. It's a made-up issue. It's a non-issue. So again, the Republican Party runs the risk here of looking like they're against democracy and having a backlash against them instead of embracing new young voters, for example, and embracing Latino and African American voters and saying, hey, look, you should be voting Republican, family values, work ethic, etc. And the Republicans will win plenty of those votes. But if they sit there and say, we want to shut you out of the process, they'll lose.
Let me do this. 45 seconds left. I got one more to get in here, but 45 seconds to you, Brad. Then as the strategist, how do you fight what Hillary just put on the table?
You fight back hard. What Hillary is doing is she's destroying democracy. There is no way to monitor elections and make sure they're fair and just by having a system that absolutely rejects oversight of elections. Making it too easy invites fraud, and you know what? Discounts the ability to make sure that the elections are fair. And I reject that, and I think Republicans should come back hard. It's not fair, and you're using the word democracy in defeating democracy. I reject it.
60 seconds, one last thing to do here. A lot of people are worn out by war. That's what someone recently said to Lindsey Graham. He fired back and said, well, those voters who don't want to see war, then don't vote for me. Brad, I got to tell you, he's honest, but that's not a way to get votes.
It isn't, because look, in America we don't have a election for the Secretary of War. As a matter of fact, we got rid of that position long ago. I think it's short-sighted for Lindsey Graham to say that. I think it's wrong, and I don't think it's a platform to be selected by a party or elected by the people.
All right, now, David, did Lindsey Graham then just play right into the hands of the left?
No, he played it in the hands of Rand Paul. And I think that there's a bona fide division among hawks and more isolationist folks in the Republican Party, and it's a good thing. Brad has said this before, and I agree with it. That level of debate on the Republican side right now is very healthy, and I think that the notion of small government, the notion of humility from government, the notion of focusing on America first, as Rand Paul describes it, runs counter to the notion of a highly interventionist military that goes around the world and intervenes. Now, the Republicans are not alone in having this divide, I should point out.
Okay, got 5 seconds.
Barack Obama had that difference as well.
All right, we got to end it there, but I'll tell you what, it makes for great fodder. It's just good to see finally some war going on here, some good verbal fighting. David Goodfriend, Bradley Blakeman, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. Stay with us. The fastest 60 minutes of news continues.